Sienna Valen didn't expect to be dragged into a billionaire's PR nightmare when she spilled a tray of champagne on his $1,000 shoes. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," she gasped, grabbing a napkin from a nearby table and crouching before the tall man in the tailored charcoal suit. His expression didn't flinch, though his icy blue eyes locked onto her like a hawk sizing up a threat. "That's Hermes," he said flatly, glancing down at his soaked shoe. Sienna blinked up at him. "I don't speak designer." "Is that worse than suede?" The corners of his mouth twitched, almost imperceptibly, but he said nothing. The silence stretched long enough for her to feel every set of eyes in the gala ballroom focused on them. She stood quickly, brushing her hands on her black server uniform. "I'll pay for the damage. I just need to know how much that is." "You couldn't afford it," he said, not cruelly, but like it was just a fact. She was about to fire back something about him being an arrogant jerk when a camera flash lit up the corner of the room. She followed his gaze. A group of reporters had spotted him, and then without warning he grabbed her hand. "What are you doing?" she hissed as he pulled her toward the nearest exit. He didn't answer until they were out the side door and into the cool night air. "You just became my girlfriend." Sienna stopped in her tracks. "I'm sorry, what?" He let go of her hand. "Not actually, just for now, I'll pay you." She stared at him like he'd grown a second head. "Is this a joke?" "I'm not joking," he said, adjusting his cufflinks. "I'm Maddox Kent." "You just saved me from a very inconvenient headline." It took her a second. Maddox Kent. The Maddox Kent, CEO of Kent Enterprises, worth somewhere north of $1 billion. The man who hadn't had a public girlfriend in years and whose name was constantly tangled in gossip. "How did I save you?" They were about to snap a photo of me alone again. "If I'm seen with a woman, they'll back off. You clearly aren't after publicity, and I don't have time to vet someone else." She folded her arms. "So you just pick random girls who spill drinks on you to pretend to date, only when they're desperate enough to consider it?" Her pride flared. "What makes you think I'm desperate? You offered to pay for Hermes' shoes on a server's salary." She opened her mouth, then shut it. He had a point. "I'll pay you $10,000 a week. Just pretend to be my girlfriend until this charity season ends. 4 weeks." Her heart skipped. $40,000, he nodded once. "You'd attend events with me, where what I provide, smile, hold my hand, that's it." Sienna hesitated. It sounded insane, but her little sister's tuition was due next month. Rent was 2 weeks behind, and 40 grand could fix a lot of things. She squared her shoulders. "Fine, you've got yourself a fake girlfriend." Maddox didn't smile. He just pulled a black card from his wallet and handed it to her. "Your first fitting is tomorrow, 7 p.m. I'll have a driver pick you up." And just like that, Sienna Valen, server by day, became the fake girlfriend of a billionaire. The next evening, Sienna stepped into the penthouse suite of a Fifth Avenue designer she couldn't pronounce. The place smelled like roses and money. A woman in all black greeted her, measured her in seconds, and dressed her in a deep sapphire gown that hugged her curves like it had been sewn onto her. When Maddox entered, he paused in the doorway. His gaze traced her from head to toe once, slowly. "That'll work." Sienna raised an eyebrow. "That's all you're going to say? No, you look nice. I'm not paying you for compliments." She let out a dry laugh. "You're a real charmer." But later, as they stepped out of the town car and onto the red carpet of the gala, his hand found the small of her back. She felt the heat of it through the silk. She leaned into him slightly, playing her part. "You're good at this," he murmured, lips close to her ear. "Faking it," she replied. He glanced down at her. "Pretending you belong here." Her stomach flipped. "Maybe I could belong." He didn't answer, just led her into the ballroom where flashbulbs popped and heads turned. Sienna smiled and laughed at the right moments, whispered things in his ear that made his jaw tighten. He played along, whispering back little nothings that sounded real enough to be true. At the end of the night, he walked her to the car, his hand lingering on hers a moment too long. "You don't have to touch me when no one's watching," she said quietly. "I know," he said, but he didn't stop. By the second event, the tabloids had photos of them everywhere. Maddox Kent's mystery girlfriend. Who is the woman who stole the untouchable billionaire's heart? Sienna read the headlines and laughed to herself. If only they knew she was being paid. But Maddox didn't seem to think it was funny. He was quieter now, more watchful. At the event, he kept her close, his fingers brushing hers every time they moved. "You're making it hard to remember this is fake," she joked as he pulled out her chair at dinner. "Maybe that's the point," he said. Her breath caught. She searched his face, but he was already sipping his wine. It wasn't until the night at his penthouse that the line really started to blur. They just returned from a museum gala. She kicked off her heels and curled up on his massive white couch, pulling the pins from her hair. "You don't have to stay," he said, loosening his tie. "We're off camera, I know, I just didn't want to go home yet." He poured 2 glasses of wine and handed her one. "Why?" she shrugged. "Because it's quiet here, and there's no leaking faucet or neighbors screaming at each other." He watched her for a moment. "You're not what I expected. Let me guess, you thought I'd be starstruck and shallow." "I thought you'd be after something." She looked at him. "And now, I think I'm the one who's in trouble." Sienna froze. "What does that mean?" But he didn't answer. Instead, he leaned forward and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "I don't know how to fake this anymore," he said, and then he kissed her. It wasn't a rushed kiss, it was slow, intentional, like he'd been waiting weeks for an excuse not to stop. When he finally pulled back, she blinked up at him. "That wasn't part of the deal." "No," he said. "It wasn't," she set her glass down. "Maddox. I told myself this would be simple. Just a clean fix to a messy problem. But every time I look at you, I forget why I started this." Her heart pounded. "So what happens now?" He didn't answer. But the way he looked at her, like she was the only thing in the world that made sense, made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, she wasn't pretending anymore either. The morning after their kiss, Sienna stood in her tiny kitchen, staring at the cracked tile floor and trying to convince herself it had meant nothing. It had to mean nothing. A kiss didn't rewrite a contract, even if it had made her forget her name for a full 30 seconds. Her phone buzzed and she nearly dropped the chipped mug in her hand. The message was short, from Maddox's assistant. "Dress fitting moved to noon. Car will be there at 11:15. No mention of the kiss, no sign of regret, no sign of anything. At 11:15 sharp, a sleek black car waited outside her building, the driver holding the door without a word. She slid into the back seat, her nerves twisted tighter than the cheap gold chain around her neck. The designer's boutique was a different one this time, sleek, modern walls lined with mirrored panels that made her feel like she was constantly being watched. The gown she was handed shimmered like liquid silver under the harsh lighting. But the reflection staring back at her didn't look sure of anything. When Maddox arrived, she was already in the final stages of tailoring. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask how she was. He simply walked around her once, stopping only when the tailor stepped away. "You're avoiding my calls," he said, his voice low and direct. "You kissed me," she said, not moving from the pedestal. "You kissed me back." I was caught off guard. His gaze didn't waver. That wasn't confusion, that was real. She stepped down, tugging the gown higher on her chest. "You don't get to decide what's real for me." He moved closer, not enough to touch, but enough to make the air between them hum. "Then tell me it didn't mean anything." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Maddox's jaw tightened. "Thought so." Before she could respond, the tailor returned, and the moment shattered like glass. They didn't speak again until that night, when the car dropped them off outside an exclusive art auction held in a Manhattan penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows, and a view that looked like it had been painted by a god. In the elevator ride up, Sienna kept her distance. Maddox didn't close the gap. Not until the doors opened and they stepped into a room filled with champagne flutes, six-figure conversations, and the unmistakable scent of polished power. A man in a velvet tuxedo approached them almost immediately, offering Maddox a firm handshake. "Maddox Kent, the man who makes markets move, and this must be the woman who finally got you to settle down." Sienna forced a smile as Maddox slid a hand to the small of her back. "I'm Sienna." "She's more than that," Maddox said calmly. "She's the only reason I show up to these things anymore." The man laughed, clearly thinking it was a line, but Maddox didn't laugh, and neither did Sienna. As the evening wore on, she found herself fielding endless questions about how they met, what she did, what drew her to Maddox. Every time she tried to give a safe answer, Maddox would inject something unexpected that made her stomach twist. "She's got this way of seeing through people," he said to one woman. Even me. Later, he leaned in and said, "You're the only one here who doesn't need anything from me." That's rare. She didn't know what to do with the way he said it, like it both irritated and fascinated him, like it terrified him. After the final painting was sold, he took her hand and led her to the rooftop, where the city lights stretched like veins across the night. There was no one else up there, just the wind and the sound of distant traffic. "I wasn't supposed to feel anything for you," he said, standing beside her at the edge. "Then stop." "I can't," she turned, folding her arms across her chest. "You hired me, Maddox. You picked me because I was convenient. I picked you because you didn't look at me like everyone else in that room. I kept you around because I thought it might keep me grounded, but I didn't expect you to become the only thing I look forward to." She stared at him, searching for the catch. "You don't date anyone seriously. You're allergic to commitment." "I was." He stepped closer. "Until I met someone who didn't care about my money, my name, or the places I could take her." Her voice dropped. "You don't know me. I know you'd rather stay quiet than say something fake. I know you count tips to the cent. I know you don't like red wine because it gives you headaches, but you drink it anyway when you're nervous. And I know you still wear your dad's old watch even though it doesn't work, because it makes you feel stronger." The wind caught her hair, sweeping it across her face. "You've been paying attention." "I haven't wanted to pay attention to anyone in a long time." She didn't answer. Instead, she turned away and stared out at the skyline. He didn't push her for a response. He just stood beside her, the silence stretching between them. The next day, everything changed. When she arrived at her apartment, there was a box waiting outside her door. Inside was a simple envelope and a folded note with his handwriting. "Wear this tonight, no cameras, just us." The dress inside wasn't couture, it wasn't flashy. It was soft, elegant, and understated, something she would have picked for herself if she could ever afford it. At precisely 7, the car took her not to a gala or auction, but to a rooftop strung with warm lights and a small table set for two. A private chef plated dishes in the corner, and a jazz band played quietly under a tent. The air smelled like lemon and fresh thyme. Maddox was already there, dressed in a navy sweater and slacks, no tie in sight. He looked different like this, not smaller, not softer, just real. "I wanted a night without pretending," he said as he pulled out her chair. "No press, no expectations. Just you and me." As they ate, she found herself laughing more, relaxing, asking questions she hadn't dared ask before. "What scares you?" she asked, dipping her bread into the olive oil. He didn't hesitate. "Needing someone." She tilted her head. "That sounds lonely." "It is." He paused. "But it was easier that way, safer, until now." She set down her fork. "You don't have to protect yourself from me. I know, that's what scares me." After dinner, they danced beneath the lights. No one watched, no cameras, no flashbulbs. Just fingers laced together and a slow rhythm that made her feel like time had stopped. "I don't know what happens after all this," she whispered against his chest. "Then let's not think about after," he said, his arms tightening around her. "Let's just have this." But later that night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she realized something had shifted. The deal might still be in place, but their hearts hadn't gotten the memo, and the next event, scheduled for the following weekend, threatened to unravel everything. Because his ex-fiancée would be there, and she wasn't coming alone. Maddox stared across the ballroom, his jaw tight, fingers drumming against his glass without rhythm. The crowd glittered in designer silks and tailored suits, but he only saw one person: Vivienne Arden, his former fiancée, standing arm in arm with a man Sienna immediately recognized from business tabloids. Claude Lemaire, French tech billionaire, Maddox's former acquisition rival. Sienna leaned in, her voice low. "Is that her?" He nodded once, eyes never leaving the pair. "She wasn't supposed to come back to New York until next quarter, and instead she walks into your event on Lemaire's arm. They're making a point." Sienna's throat tightened. "What kind of point?" He turned to her finally. "That I'm replaceable." She placed her hand lightly on his chest. "Then let her watch you with someone who isn't." He looked down at her, something unreadable flickering in his expression. "You mean that?" "I didn't put on 4-inch heels and a custom neckline for practice." He slid his hand into hers and led her straight toward Vivienne and Lemaire without hesitation. Sienna's pulse quickened with every step, but she didn't falter. Not when Vivienne turned, her red lips curving in a way that was more challenge than welcome. Not when Lemaire's smile widened like he'd just won a bet. Maddox, Vivienne said, her voice a polished blade. You've traded up. She's not a trade, Maddox said, his tone flat. She's the reason I still show up to these things. Vivienne's eyes narrowed slightly, but she recovered quickly. How charming, and what is it you do, darling? She asked Sienna. I give Maddox a reason to stop checking his watch. Lemaire laughed, the sound dry and amused. In Finn, someone interesting. Vivienne tilted her head. How long has this arrangement been going on? Long enough, Maddox said, and it won't be ending anytime soon. Sienna felt the tension radiating off him in waves, but when his hand squeezed hers, she squeezed back. He wasn't pretending in that moment. Neither of them were. After a few more polite jabs disguised as compliments, Maddox guided her away, his expression unreadable. They made it to a quieter corner of the venue near the terrace doors. You didn't tell me she was that. Venomous, Sienna whispered. I didn't think she'd weaponize an entire gala. She looked at me like I was gum on her Laubautin. You handled it better than I would have. I was one sarcastic comment away from listing my hourly rate. He turned to face her fully. You didn't have to defend me. I wasn't defending you. I was defending us, he blinked. Us, she hesitated, the word sitting between them like a lit fuse. Maddox, what are we doing? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a delicate chain with a tiny sapphire pendant, elegant, subtle, nothing like the flashy diamonds she'd seen others wear tonight. I saw it last week, he said. Didn't know why I bought it. Now I do. He clasped it around her neck himself, his fingers brushing her skin. She didn't move, couldn't. You can't keep giving me things, she said quietly. It makes it harder to pretend, harder to tell myself I'm not falling for you. The room faded around them. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Then don't tell yourself that anymore. She looked up at him, the words lodged in her throat. But before she could say anything, a flashbulb burst to their right. A photographer, face flushed, was snapping rapid shots. Maddox stepped in front of her protectively, but it was too late. She recognized the logo on the camera bag TMI Weekly. The most ruthless gossip site in the city. By the time they left the gala, the damage had already been done. The next morning, her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Photos of her and Maddox were everywhere. But it wasn't the glamorous couple shots that caught her breath. It was the close-up of Maddox placing the necklace around her neck. The intimacy in the gesture, the look in his eyes. And the headline beneath it. Mystery girl breaks bachelor's wall, reel or rebound. She was still staring at the screen when someone knocked at her door. When she opened it, Maddox stood there, unshaven, jacket slung over one shoulder. Can I come in? She stepped aside without a word. I saw the article, he said, running a hand through his hair. It's everywhere. You think Vivienne leaked it? Lemaire, more likely. He hates that I beat him to the foundation board seat. Then congratulations, you've won the war, but now everyone thinks I'm some kind of strategy. He stepped closer. You're not, I know that, she said. But do you? He reached for her hand, but she pulled back. I need to know something, she said. Before I go any further, he waited. Why her? Why were you engaged to someone like that? He exhaled slowly. Because it made sense. She fit the life, the image, the expectations. She knew how to play the game. And I don't. You're not playing anything. That's why I can't stop thinking about you. She crossed her arms. You want me because I'm different. But what happens when being different gets inconvenient? He didn't speak. The silence stretched. I'm not a statement piece, Maddox, she said. I'm not here to prove you've changed. I need to know this is real, that it's not just rebellion disguised as affection. He stepped forward, voice low. I don't rebel, I build, I protect, and I don't chase things I don't want. Then prove it. That night, she didn't hear from him, not a text, not a call, but the next morning, a car arrived outside her building again. The driver handed her a single envelope sealed in black wax, no note. Just an address and a time. She followed the instructions, unsure what to expect. The car drove her out of Manhattan into the hills along the Hudson. When they stopped, she stepped out in front of a sprawling estate that looked like it had been carved out of another century. Stone walls, arched windows, ivy crawling up the sides like it had always belonged there. Inside, she found Maddox waiting in a sunlit room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a fire already burning in the hearth. "This was my mother's," he said quietly. "She left it to me when she passed. I haven't brought anyone here, ever." Sienna turned slowly, taking it in. "Why now?" "Because I wanted you to see something that has nothing to do with business or press or expectations." He walked toward her, slower this time. "You asked me to prove this is real. I don't know how to say the right thing every time. But I know I feel more like myself with you than I ever did with anyone else." She watched him, heart pounding. "I'm not offering you a penthouse view or a press release," he said. "I'm offering you this, the parts of me I don't show anyone." She reached for his hand. "Then stop calling it fake." He pulled her into him, their foreheads brushing. "I already did." She kissed him, then no audience, no cameras, just truth. Later, as they lay together on the old velvet couch in front of the fire, she traced the lines of his hand and whispered, "What happens now?" He looked at her like she was the first thing he'd ever believed in. "Now I figure out how to keep you." The rain came down in a quiet, steady drizzle as Sienna stepped out of the car and into the circular drive of Maddox's office tower. The building loomed above her, all steel and glass piercing the gray sky. She tightened her coat, glancing once at the driver, who offered no explanation. Just as before, the message had come through Maddox's assistant, no details, just a time and place. The elevator ride to the top floor was silent. When the doors opened, the usual buzz of his executive suite was absent. The receptionist's desk was empty. Lights were dimmed. The only sound came from the storm outside, faint against the panoramic windows. She found him in the conference room, standing at the far end of the long table, his back straight, hands braced on the polished wood. The room was bare, no assistants, no papers, no distractions. He looked up when she entered. For once, he didn't try to hide whatever storm was behind his eyes. "I asked everyone to clear the floor." Sienna closed the door behind her. "Why?" "Because I needed to tell you something without anyone watching me do it." Her heart beat faster. "Okay." He walked around the table, stopping just a few feet from her. "You once asked me what happens when different becomes inconvenient." She nodded. "It already did. Every advisor I have thinks I've lost my mind. The board's impatient. The press is circling like I'm one bad headline away from collapse. And I couldn't care less." She waited. "I've spent years building something that looks perfect from the outside. But the truth is, none of it matters unless I have something real to come home to." Sienna's breath caught, but she didn't speak. "I used to think love was a liability," he said, "an opening for people to manipulate you. But then you walked into my life and proved there's a kind of love that makes you stronger." She blinked, unsure if she'd heard him right. "Maddox, I'm not asking for perfection, I'm asking for you. With your sarcasm, your stubbornness, your fire, I want all of it. Every day." He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it without a word. Inside wasn't a ring. It was a key. Sienna stared at it. "To my real home," he said. "Not the penthouse, not the estate, the one I'm building for us just outside the city. I bought the land last week." She looked up slowly. "You're building a house," he nodded, "with a greenhouse in the back. You once said you've never had your own garden." Her hands trembled as she reached for the key, then paused. "This isn't just a gesture, is it?" "No. This is a foundation." She took the key, her fingers closing around the smooth metal. "You really think we can belong in each other's worlds?" "I don't want to fit you into mine," he said. "I want to build a new one with you." Emotion welled in her chest, unexpected and overwhelming. "You're not afraid anymore." "I'm still terrified," he said. "But I'd rather face everything with you than spend another day pretending I don't need anyone." She stepped into his arms, holding the key tightly between them as if anchoring herself to the moment. "I love you," she whispered. He closed his eyes, forehead resting against hers. "Say that again." "I love you." He kissed her, then not urgent, not possessive, but with the kind of certainty that grounded her, like he'd finally stopped running from the truth. When they pulled apart, she rested her head on his shoulder. "So what now?" she asked. "We go to Paris." Her head snapped up. "What? There's a gala next week. I was going to cancel, but now I want to go with you, not as a statement, not to quiet rumors. Just because I want to dance with you under a chandelier and wake up to your voice in another city. I don't even have a passport." "You do now," he said, handing her a small envelope. "An address is waiting for you on the plane. You chartered a jet for this?" "No," he said, brushing her hair behind her ear. "I bought one." She laughed, the sound breaking through the tension between them. "Of course you did." The following night, the Paris skyline glowed beneath them as the jet descended. Sienna leaned against the window, watching the lights shimmer like gold dust. Maddox sat beside her, his hand resting casually over hers, the silence between them no longer heavy, just full. They arrived at a restored chateau just outside the city, where the gala was being held. The place looked like it had been lifted from a fairy tale: stone towers, wrought iron balconies and candlelit windows flickering against the night. As they stepped into the ballroom, heads turned. But unlike before, Sienna didn't flinch. She stood taller, her hands secure in Maddox's, her chin lifted. The music swelled, and he led her to the center of the floor. As they danced, he leaned down, lips brushing her ear. "Remember when I said you were just a fix to a messy problem?" She nodded. "I was wrong." "About what?" "You were the reason I finally let the mess fall apart." She smiled, her fingers tightening at the back of his neck. "And now I'm finally building something real." Their movements slowed, the world pulling in tighter around them. No flashing cameras. No whispers. Just a billionaire who had finally stopped hiding, and the woman who had changed everything without ever asking for more. The next morning, they strolled through a quiet garden behind the chateau. The sun had just risen, casting soft light across the stone paths and budding roses. "Does this count as our real first trip together?" she asked. "No," he said. "That starts tomorrow." "Tomorrow? I've cleared my schedule. We're going wherever you want." She turned to him. "Anywhere?" He nodded. "Then I want to go where no one knows your name." He tilted his head. "Why?" "Because I want to see the version of you that isn't carrying an empire on his back." He smiled, the kind that reached his eyes. "Then let's disappear for a while." As they walked hand in hand, the future stretched before them, uncertain, imperfect, but entirely theirs. And for the first time, Maddox Kent didn't need a plan. He had her, and she was enough. The ferry rocked gently beneath them as it cruised across Lake Como, the water a mirror of cloudy spring light. Sienna leaned against the rail, her hair swept up in a soft twist, the breeze tugging at a few loose strands. Maddox stood beside her, his hand resting lightly on the curve of her waist, his silence more content than brooding for once. Their escape had stretched what was meant to be 3 days in Paris, had turned into an unspoken agreement to pause the world entirely. They'd traveled through small towns in northern Italy, taken wrong turns on cobblestone streets, eaten fresh figs from market stalls, and slept in places without 5-star ratings or security detail. He hadn't worn a tie in days. She hadn't checked her bank account once. "You're quiet," she said, watching the passing cliffs rise like emerald walls around the lake. "I'm thinking," Maddox replied, his voice low, almost reverent, dangerous. "You'd be surprised how rare it is for me to think without calculating something." She turned to face him. "And what are you thinking about now?" "That I've done a lot of things to protect myself, but none of it really protected me from the one thing I didn't see coming." She raised an eyebrow. "Me. Us." The boat docked at a private landing below a villa carved into the hillside. The driver offered no explanation, simply nodded for them to disembark. Maddox guided her up a winding stone path, the sound of water lapping against the shore fading behind them. At the top, a wrought iron gate opened into a courtyard filled with white roses and citrus trees. She paused as they stepped into it, her gaze sweeping over the quiet grandeur. There was no staff. No photographers, just silence and the bloom of orange blossoms on the wind. "You brought me here without telling me where we were going," she said, her voice soft. "I needed the place to speak for itself." He led her through the open terrace doors into the villa. The interior was sun-drenched, rustic and elegant, with carved wood beams and a fireplace already lit despite the warm air outside. A table had been set in the center of the room, no candles. No flowers, only a velvet box in the middle, its deep navy hue almost black in the amber light. Sienna stopped. Maddox turned to her, his expression unreadable for a beat. Then he dropped to one knee, her breath caught. "I've spent my life building things, companies, deals, walls around myself, but nothing I've ever made has meant more to me than the life I want to build with you. Maddox, you make me softer in the places I didn't think could be touched. You challenge me, ground me, make me want things I never admitted I wanted. You didn't just change my life, Sienna, you're the only part of it that feels true. She blinked back a sudden rush of tears. You're really doing this. I'm not asking because I think it's time. I'm asking because I can't imagine a world where you're not beside me every morning, stealing the sheets and arguing with me about which way the coffee filter goes. She let out a wet laugh. He opened the box. The ring was delicate, a single sapphire flanked by 2 diamonds, set in platinum. Timeless, uncomplicated, like her, like them, marry me, no contracts, no press releases, just you and me, building something real together. She dropped to her knees in front of him, cupping his face. This is the easiest yes I've ever said. They kissed in the middle of the villa, the ring still between them, the lake glimmering beyond the open doors. Later that evening, they sat barefoot on the terrace steps, the sky streaked with violet as the sun dipped behind the mountains. She leaned into him, her head on his shoulder. Did you always plan to propose here? I didn't, but the moment we arrived, I knew this was it. Why? He wrapped an arm around her. Because I saw you standing in that courtyard and realized I'd never felt more like myself than I do with you. And that's where I want to begin whatever comes next. She smiled against his shirt. So what does come next? A wedding, obviously. In Italy, wherever you want, a vineyard, a beach, a courthouse. I'd marry you in a train station if it meant you'd be mine. She tilted her head up to kiss him again, slow and deep. You already have me. They stayed a full week longer in the villa, waking late, making breakfast together, dancing barefoot on the terrace at night. Maddox found himself laughing more, sleeping deeper, listening instead of always speaking first. She taught him how to let go of control without losing himself. He taught her how to trust the ground beneath her feet, even when it was made of stone and silk. Their wedding was held 3 months later in a vineyard on the Amalfi coast, surrounded by olive trees and the smell of sea salt. Sienna wore a simple ivory dress with a low back and no train. Maddox wore a suit without a tie. Neither of them wrote vows in advance. They spoke from the heart, unrehearsed. I used to think love was something that asked you to give up pieces of yourself, she had said, standing before him beneath a canopy of white roses. But with you, I've only ever felt more whole. And Maddox, voice rough with emotion, had replied, you didn't just change my life, you gave it meaning. They danced under string lights while a jazz trio played soft music in the background. No press, no photographers, just real friends. His assistant cried. Her sister delivered a toast that made everyone laugh and then tear up. At the end of the night, Maddox pulled Sienna into a quiet grove of lemon trees, far from the others. I never asked what name you want to take, he murmured, brushing his lips across her shoulder. She turned to him, eyes shimmering in the low light. Yours, not because I need it, but because I want to carry you with me everywhere I go. You already do. He kissed her there, surrounded by sweetness and stars, the world shrinking to just the two of them. Months passed. They returned to the villa overlooking Lake Como, now theirs. Sienna started a foundation that funded scholarships for young women in underprivileged communities, something she'd dreamed of for years but never imagined possible. Maddox stepped back from the day-to-day of his empire, handing over the reins to someone he trusted, choosing instead to invest his time into projects that made a difference, not just a profit. They traveled often quiet places, far from headlines. They hosted dinners under fairy lights for the people who mattered. They made mistakes, had arguments about where to live next, and learned to apologize without ego. And every night, no matter where they were, Maddox would wrap his arms around her and whisper something simple. You're home. Because in the end, all the power, all the wealth, all the control he'd once clung to it meant nothing without her, and she, once a woman who had never belonged in his world, had become the center of it. Theirs was not a perfect love, it was better, it was real. Forever.